What's up, folks? This is Addy Ads, and we have a great guest on the show. This is the Public Intel Report writer and photographer Dave Paone, or Paone, depending on how much Italian you may speak. My pronunciation isn't the best, of course. And Dave has bylines in the Epoch Times, and we're going to talk about journalism and the state of the media, what he's been up to recently, what stories he's been working on, and the Ghislaine Maxwell trial as well, which we both covered in depth every single. So thanks for coming on the show, Dave.
Well, thanks for having me. I hope I can live up to that introduction you just rolled. I don't know if anything I'm going to say is as exciting as all those graphics.
Yeah. No, it's I'm sure you will. I mean, I definitely enjoyed the group of people we kind of ran with during the trial. I thought it was enjoyable just talking about different ideas and trying to understand the legalese. I think we're on the fifth floor a lot of those days, but yeah. Let's start with that. But before actually we get to that, could we just know a little bit more about you and why you got into journalism, or how you did. I don't know if you want to talk about your past careers that you've had too, which we've talked about, I know, in person. Wherever you want to take it, sir.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm happy to say my high school photography teacher was and is a very accomplished documentary photographer. And you might think that that's a contradiction. How accomplished could he be if he is a high school photography teacher? But trust me, he's very accomplished. So I had that background. And even before I met him, I loved looking at Life magazine, although the heyday of Life magazine was long gone by the time I started looking at it. But I loved Life magazine pictures, and I had this great photography teacher. And then in high school, my dentist, who lived in my hometown, a very small town on Long Island called Malvern, 1 square mile, he started a weekly newspaper. So my father covered the village board meetings, and I shot photographs. So that was kind of my introduction to journalism. I guess 9th or 10th grade, photographing for this weekly newspaper. So I went to a lot of things, everything from village board meetings to street fairs and what have you, mostly photographing. And then I did my first story, article and photograph. I think I was in 9th grade for that. So now I was a reporter and photographer. Then studied photojournalism in college in Manhattan. But, I always wanted to be in the movie business. So I did not go into journalism right away. And I also had gotten a New York State art teacher certification, K through 12, and I didn't want to be an art teacher either. I wanted to be in the movies. So I wound up in the movie business, eventually becoming a camera assistant. And my first really big professional job was the original Law and Order. So everything I know about law, I learned on Law and Order. This was the second half of the first season and the first half of the second season. I was the camera trainee, and that was my time on there. My father, on the other hand, was very knowledgeable about law. My mother always told him you should go back to college and get a law degree, but he never did it. So, I had a little bit of knowledge about law through my father. Eventually, unfortunately, my career as a camera assistant died, and I left the movie business, kicking and screaming. I didn't want to go, but I fell back on my journalism background. So for the last 15 years or so, I've been a reporter and photographer. So I had started with the Epoch Times in November of 2021. And I was only on the job for about 2 weeks, and I was doing soft news. That I remember the particular week I'm going to talk about, I had interviewed um, a magician about magic shops in New York City, and I had just had a story published about cat cafes. So I was doing this soft news, and the editor gave me a call and said, the Ghislaine Maxwell trial is going to start in federal court next week. Do you want to cover it? And I said, first response is absolutely. Second response is, are you sure you want to send me? And he says, yeah, he says there's a pretrial hearing tomorrow. Go to it and cover it. So, I go to this thing and I'm in the courtroom and I'm not even exactly sure who Ghislaine Maxwell is. There's all these people seated at the defense table. And I think that's Ghislaine Maxwell. I didn't even know how to pronounce her first name. So, I took notes and I jotted down what she was wearing just in case that was indeed Ghislaine Maxwell. And after it was over, I said to one of the court officers, I said, was that Miss Maxwell seated over there in the corner? And he said, yes. Oh, good. Now I know who the defendant is. So I wrote up the story, submitted it. And of course, in federal court, you can't shoot photographs and you can't make recordings. So I had no camera, no recorder. It was all done by hand. So I did that, filed it, he ran it. A week later, the trial began. So went there the first day, and you were talking about the fifth floor. I'll explain to your viewers. It was a media circus the first day, so there were hundreds of reporters there on video and print, and all from all over the world. I heard many. I heard people speaking French. I heard people speaking German.
Spanish.
And
Yeah.
the courtroom itself was fairly small, and they were still doing the social distancing nonsense. So there were these overflow rooms where people like you and I wound up, where they had a
Yeah.
live video feed.
The plebeians.
You're right. And as you mentioned, we were on the fifth floor. And I got to tell you, as you know, the fifth floor was the party floor. We had true journalists, and then we had a lot of the general public, which included, for lack of a better description, a lot of crackpots. There were some real wacky people there.
A lot of characters for sure.
A lot of characters, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which made it very entertaining. So, it was funny. As the trial went on, I'm writing notes fast and furiously, and writing down quotes as accurately as I could hear them and
Right.
write them down. No recorder.
Yep. Really hard.
And
Yeah.
what was nice about the fifth floor, seeing that we weren't actually in the actual courtroom, all the reporters could ask each other, I missed this word. What was it? Or
Yeah.
and
I love
I
that.
saved
Yeah.
some people. I helped some people out. Some people helped me out. And then there was that fellow Joe. What was his last name? Joe something.
Yeah. Nearman. We had a lawyer in the court. Yeah.
Right, a lawyer. So there was one point I was very confused, and I said, Joe, explain to me what just happened. And he explained it to me and everybody around. So it was all a lot of camaraderie. It was all very nice, even with the crackpots who were very entertaining.
And
But here's the part I really quite wasn't ready for. I'm writing fast and furiously, and there's a lot of people talking. I mean, the witnesses spoke for, they were on the stand for hours at a time. And I'm in my head, I'm thinking, is this noteworthy? And will this come into play later? Now, as I said, everything I know about law, I learned on Law and Order. Now, in episodic television, which of course is not real, Direct examination takes 2.5 minutes. Cross-examination takes 1.5 minutes. They get right to the point, and all the dialogue is important to the episode. In real life, direct examination is 4 hours. Cross-examination is 3 hours. And they're talking about all kinds of things.
Yeah, and there's a
So,
lot of
my father,
subtext too.
what's that?
There's a lot of subtext too, wouldn't you say? They
Absolutely. In fact, there was
If you're
one
not
point.
in the courtroom, you're not gonna see it or maybe detect it. You know what I'm saying? Would you say?
Well, yeah, that's why episodic TV is a lot better than real life.
Yeah, right.
So, um, my father has long been gone. So, he was the knowledgeable one about law. So I kind of had to channel him to help me write down the important stuff. Now, here's what I'm getting at. I was the only reporter there from the Epoch Times. So the readership was going to read whatever I provided.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I'm thinking the whole time, am I choosing the right quotes? Am I choosing the right narrative? I mean, I can't write what the witness said for 4 hours.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not publishing
hard,
the
and
transcript.
and you have to do it every single day. It's
Well,
really hard.
do you remember? I believe it was the pilot who was testifying, and he testified for hours. The
Visosky or
Yes, yeah, Lawrence
yeah,
Sosowski, yes.
yeah.
He the prosecution kept asking him questions about staircases. And there was like 20 minutes of talking about staircases. And I'm thinking, as a Law and Order writer, if I were writing an episode of Law and Order, these staircases would come into play somewhere down the line, like one of the crimes took place in the staircases. Well, after he was done, nobody talked about staircases again. I don't know what that was all about.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah.
had a lot of notes about staircases.
Yeah, it might have been when they were talking about what the inside of the house looked like to
Yes, no,
verify if people.
they in the direct examination, they asked him all kinds of questions. What's in this room? What's in this room? Have you been to here? And the
Yeah.
staircases. And did I miss something? Although none of that came into play later.
It was kind of bizarre how there was a bunch of people the first day, and then until the last day, there was like by the end of the trial, you knew everybody you were gonna see the next day, basically, you know?
Well, again, had it been a Law and Order episode, it would have been a lot easier to cover.
Yeah, right. The
So,
dialogue's very succinct, and the plot's always moving every single, line.
right,
But
exactly.
yeah, real life is different, yeah.
And so, I felt it was kind of kind of a big responsibility of me to choose the right information
Yeah,
to put in these in the coverage each day.
yeah,
And I never really knew if what I was doing was right. And I
yeah,
suppose every reporter had the same responsibility or the same dilemma. What do I report on?
yeah. I quickly got to the point where I just tried to say what happened, as much as I could jot down verbatim, which was, hard because they were moving so quickly, and some stuff, as you alluded to, was very much useless. But then the other stuff was golden, and you had to be like paying attention the whole time, basically.
Right, yes.
Um, to otherwise maybe you'd miss it, depending on who you're sitting by. But I remember there was one moment, and I think you were in the room, and I can't remember exactly. Oh, it had to do with the dates on the manifest for Marching Kova, I think it was, uh, or whatever pilot. I think it was Marching Kova, even though they never said her name. Uh, they basically proved that she was lying about it, which is pretty. It was a moment, and myself and Joe Neerman, definitely notice that right away. But I mean, there was other stuff I for sure missed, and I would ask people around me, what this person said, or if there was a moment people were talking about and I missed it. So that was nice, and in a sense, I'm glad I didn't make it in the first room, but uh, I did eventually get to see her in person. It was actually at the Jurgate hearing. I saw Maxwell. There was like shoot, not like 20 journalists there, if that, like 15 maybe. I don't know. It
Well,
wasn't very many.
I was so happy that there were the overflow rooms that the following month, so January of last year, right about this time, January into February, I covered, what was it? Sarah Palin versus the New York Times Company,
Oh,
and
nice.
it
Yeah,
was
yep, yep.
a mini reunion. There were a lot of the fifth floor people were back,
Cool,
and
cool.
seeing that this wasn't as high profile, some of the court security officers, one of them gave me the opportunity to be in the actual courtroom. And I
Yeah.
said, what? I said, give that to somebody else. I want the overflow room because I know in the overflow room I could stop and ask somebody a question. I could, we could confer and make sure the quotes were accurate, yada yada yada. So I prefer the overflow room.
Oh, wow. Yeah. As I've mentioned before, a woman gave me her spot in line, a younger woman, and she had paid for it, and they still wouldn't let me in the courtroom during the trial. But as I mentioned, I got to go during the Jurgate hearing. And another time, I wasn't even allowed in the building after I had been there earlier that morning. It was amazing. Really, yeah, that was a limited hangout. That was my summary of the trial. That was the title I gave it, limited hangout. I don't know what you thought about that, because there was definitely a divide, between the mainstream in the journalists and even like the court security, I guess
Yeah,
media probably in general.
yeah. Well, it's funny. I think you definitely, I definitely, and a couple of other people I know, as one point or another, had a little bit of a back and forth with one of the court security officers.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
know they didn't like you.
Yeah, they didn't seem to. I don't know. I mean, the dude was polite, the chief guy, but Nadia L entered in the building before me, the Jurygate hearing, and she heard him mutter. He said, "Oh no, it's this guy again," or something like that. When he saw me, it's kind of funny,
Well,
but
a lot of people during lunch would leave the building, and I guess
yeah,
that's where
I would
you
do
had the
that.
problem getting back in.
Yeah, well, I left a little earlier because I had an interview, so I left probably around 11, because I think lunch was usually at like noon 30 or so. Um, and yeah, I would usually leave the building at lunchtime, and
Yeah,
I'd
see,
always try to be the first one out. I often wasn't, but I was usually one of the first people out just to get it out on Twitter right away.
but see,
Um,
I learned once you're in a building like this, just stay put, because you never know what's going to happen when you try to get back in.
it's true. Yeah, it's true. It helps if you have, a New York press pass, which I actually have one waiting for me when I can find some time to get to New York City.
Yeah, I just
So
picked up my new one.
oh nice. Yeah, it expires in like 2 years or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
yeah, it's
just
2 years now. It's great. Yeah.
yeah, excellent. Yeah, so uh yeah, the trial was, yeah, I mean, you had a different, job than I did in a sense. I mean, I don't know if I could have done that. I kind of tried to do that the first few days, but it was so hard. And I was also doing interviews, which you I don't think had to do, or I don't know. Did you do any interviews reporting on that, or just
No,
writing?
mine was strictly what was going on in the trial. However, remember there was that one victim who, she wasn't testifying, but she showed up every day from Philadelphia. Annie,
Yeah.
was that Annie?
Um. No. No. Liz Stein.
Liz Stein. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
And when I found out she was a victim, we had said hello to each other several times during the course, and when when I found out she was a victim, I said to her, "You, you have, I hear you have a story to tell." And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Would you like to tell it to me?" And she said, "No." So I, I was kind of hoping to get an exclusive there, but it didn't happen. And I
Yeah,
didn't push it.
she told me no as oh well, I mean, she didn't even I don't know. I mean, was that after the article came out? I think it was in the Herald, or was that before that?
This was about maybe halfway through the trial.
But do you remember when the story broke? I think it was what's her name? Julie Brown, Julie K. Brown.
No, I
W-
wasn't aware of that.
Okay, she's the one who broke that story. I don't know if you talked to her before that or not, but she had told me about it, and yeah, she gave it to Julie Brown. So
Yeah, I think it was before that because no one seemed to be paying a whole lot of attention to her.
no, yeah, I had lunch with her one day. I was actually, I mean, yeah, that was the reason I knew is because I kept talking to her because I noticed she was there every single day and she wasn't really talking to anybody.
That's right. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but
Well,
anyways,
I'm happy to say I'm in contact with a couple of the fifth floor people,
oh,
you
nice.
and Nadia L. In fact, I used, I don't want to say used, but Nadia was a subject of, or one of the subjects of a series of articles I did on unvaccinated New York City workers who had been terminated. So she was a special education teacher, and she didn't take the vaccination and got fired. And I did a couple of stories on teachers and cops and a sanitation worker, all for the Epoch Times. And I photographed Nadia in front of one of the Department of Education buildings, and and that was the lead picture in one of these articles, and I was very happy with it. And one of my favorite pictures from I guess it was last year. That was I think we shot that in January of last year, so it was one of my favorite pictures of 2022. And I'm in regular contact with her still.
Yeah, she's great. She's great. I just covered her article she did in Eliza Blue, which was very objective, I would say. I didn't really take a particular assertion one way or another, but uh, yeah, she was really fun to talk to. She actually recognized me on the first day. That was the only day I was on the ninth floor, and yeah, I could tell that first day because there were so many people. I'm sure the security was a lot more uh like on edge. I mean, they came over to us and like basically tried to ask. They did. He dude asked us our vaccination status, and I didn't say anything. And I know it was directed at me uh for whatever reason, but it was it was ridiculous. I think video and photos should be allowed in federal court. What do you think, Dave?
Well, that would make our lives a whole lot easier,
Yeah,
and
right.
I don't see why not. I mean, maybe back in the day when that law was passed, there was a legitimate reason, but I don't know what it was. I mean, New York State, the lower courts allow it now. I mean, look at the O.J. Simpson trial. I mean, that was national coverage
Yeah, or the
on
Rittenhouse
television.
trial, the Depp and Heard trial.
Yeah,
Those
all
are
of
all
that.
state courts, so they allow, video and photo. You know what's bizarre about that is with the Connect stuff, the True the Vote case in Houston, a video leaked from inside the court, and that was, I don't know if that was state or federal. Uh, I thought it was federal courts, which is kind of interesting because that whole thing was bizarre. I don't know if you kept up with that whole Connect thing and Eugene Yu and True the Vote, Catherine Engelbrecht, and the guy's name is Greg Phillips. But yeah, it was, I don't know. It seemed like something deeper going on there for sure. I wrote a lot about it actually for National File at the time, but I also published an independent piece on my website, publicintel.info, which goes even deeper into it. But since you left the Epic Times, what have you been covering, Dave? Yeah, and if you want to, kind of morph that into the state of journalism right now, or
Well,
unless you have more to, say about the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, because it's something I'm definitely going to try to follow up on, the whole Maxwell Epstein case this year. Uh, if I just don't know when it's going to happen.
well, I'll leave you with this with with the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. As I said, I went back and I covered Sarah Palin versus the New York Times Company, and this editor made a court journalist out of me. I was a little scared at first. I was outside of my comfort zone, but I guess my father helped me out, and I wouldn't mind covering courts regularly. And Newsday, which is the big newspaper on Long Island, recently had a courts journalist position posted, and I applied. I didn't get anywhere. About 3 weeks later, they posted it again. I applied again, and I wrote to the editor who oversees the courts, and she thanked me for sending her clips and what have you. Still nothing. And then Sam Bankman-Fried was going to appear in the
Yeah, I
same
saw
court
that.
Ghislaine Maxwell was in. And I wrote to her and I said, let me cover this for you. Let me cover this for Newsday this one time. And I figured that she could use that as a sample or something. And she was very nice and wrote back, and she said, Newsday doesn't cover federal court in Manhattan. So that was the end of that. But I would have loved to have gone back for that, for them. So
Sure, yeah. They
I'm ready to cover
cover.
courts if anybody wants it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, they probably cover lower courts, or
Well, on Long Island, there's I think we have two county, Nassau and Suffolk County courts, and then I believe there's state court also on Long Island.
oh yeah, okay.
The closest federal court, I believe, is Brooklyn. I think.
Eastern District.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Wow, excellent. Yeah, court reporting is hard, but it's definitely fun. I think. But yeah, like you said, if there's that would be amazing. That's honestly a dream, is like getting photos and videos inside a court, because then it's way more interactive, and you can get stuff verbatim.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe lower courts coverage is, maybe that's where it's at. Who knows?
Well, I'd love to do it. I'd love to take. He turned me into a court journalist, so
Yeah, there you go.
I can put that on my in my repertoire now.
What do you think about the state of journalism right now, Dave? Uh, yeah,
Well,
and media.
well, the good news is there's a lot of publications, and when I say publications, I'm talking websites as well. The other good news is a lot of niche publications. Like there'll be some just for law, there'll be some just for real estate, or what have you. So sports. So there's plenty of opportunities I found in all of them. But for me, I'm really not a sports reporter. I'm really not. I don't know. I mean, I've seen ads posted for like hedge fund reporters. I don't know what a hedge fund is.
Yeah.
So I could not cover that. So that's good that there's a lot of these niches. And I don't know if you noticed, but I guess it was last November, a law went into effect that any jobs for New York City that are posted, they have to tell you the salary. Where up until recently, if you were to apply for a journalism job or any job, you really have no idea what they pay. And now sometimes they put in a single figure, sometimes they put in a range. And a lot of these journalism jobs pay very well.
Oh,
some of them. So that's all good. But as we were speaking about briefly a little while ago, the downside is the expectations for the number of stories to get, on the website or from a particular journalist, per day or per week is unrealistic. They
you think
want
so?
this. What's that?
You think so?
Oh
Yeah.
yes, yeah. They want
Yeah.
this constant feed of new material, and it's are you a journalist or are you working in a sausage factory? You know, just cranking these things out, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't need to be bombarded with that much information. And although it appears people who run these websites and these news outlets feel they need to bombard their readers with information.
Yeah. It's an overabundance of info, for sure. Yeah, I don't know. It's bizarre and it's unfortunate, really. It's I don't know. There's also, I mean, I don't know. Are they still requiring vaccinations? Do you know? I don't know if you have many friends in corporate media. CBS just called me today for some footage I took of some fighter jets flying over North Carolina. So that was kind of funny. But um, yeah, I mean, I presume they would still force people to get vaccinated, but I
Well,
don't know.
for some reason, they're still doing that, even though
Yeah.
all this information, all the crackpots on the fifth floor who knew better, who you know, you could have called the fifth floor the conspiracy theory floor.
There you go.
We've all
Yeah.
been proven right on this stuff.
The dude, remember that's what the dude on Slate called us.
Oh yeah,
What
yeah,
was
yeah.
that?
Well,
Seth, what was his name? Seth Stevenson, I think, or something like
okay.
that.
When
Yeah, and then I
I
confronted him about it, and he was like, I don't even know. Like,
now listen, when I believe Nadia sent me the link to that. Somebody sent me the link.
yeah,
I think it was Nadia. So I read it and I loved it because I thought it was pretty accurate. He said,
yeah, yeah.
it was a
He
floor full
wasn't
of
too harsh.
characters. Okay,
Yeah,
when we went back for what were you calling it, jury gate? For
Jurgate. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
for jury gate, I was in the actual courtroom, and he was there. Although I didn't know he had written the article, and he recognized me from the fifth floor from before, a month before. And he said hello, and I said, "Oh yeah, we're all back here." I said, "Somebody wrote an article about the fifth floor," and he says, "Oh, it was me." I said, "Oh, that's great." I got a laugh, at it. Uh, I was thinking along the same lines, that there were so many characters there that it would make for a good story.
Yeah,
But he did it,
yeah.
which is
No, yeah, it was good. I don't know if that was the basis of the article. I don't think it was, but yeah, it was okay. I mean, when he was pretty polite about it when I talked to him about it, and we were standing next to each other in line that morning of the jury gate. And you know what's funny about that is that whole situation came about because of that article that Lucia Crowley Osborne or Osborne Crowley, whatever her name is, for the Independent, she did the Australian lady, um, and she didn't even go to the hearing. I thought that
no,
was, I
yeah,
thought that
that's
was
all.
kind of interesting. I actually called her out on it. I was like, why? The whole reason this is happening is because your article, and you didn't you didn't even follow up on it. It was, I don't know. I thought it was kind of offensive, to be honest.
Well, was she back in Australia?
You have a cat, I hear.
I do. Yes, there she
Uh,
is. Also on the third day of the trial. So this was
yeah,
December 1st, 2021. I'd only been working with the Epoch Times for a few weeks. It was the third day of the trial, and my cat at the time was not well, and I had to bring her to the animal hospital that morning. And I had to call in and to say I can't cover the trial today. I have a sick cat, and unfortunately, I had to put her down that day. It was one of the worst days of my life. So I missed one day of the trial. It was the third day. Although I was there for the pre-trial hearing for one day, so I guess I kind of mixed up for it. But now December 1st and my cat and Ghislaine Maxwell are all kind of in my mind together. That was a bad day for me. That was one of the worst days of my life. But that has
Yeah.
nothing to do with journalism.
Yeah, no, that's all right. It's very relevant. I was actually cat sitting during the trial. Her name was Jenny. Unfortunately, she actually passed away as well since then. But I missed one day of the trial as well. It was actually the last day before Christmas break, and I was sick. I got COVID, and I couldn't even get out of bed for most of the day.
So the court
Uh,
security officers were right about you.
what did they say?
No, I'm joking.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
joking.
Okay. I wouldn't be surprised. Well, but I kind of went ghost, and people are like, "What's going on? Where is he?" And I explained, I'd gotten sick, and
But did
I
anybody miss
tried
me?
to. What's that?
Did anybody miss me?
Well, it was so early in the trial. I don't think we
Yeah.
had met yet.
Yeah, I'm joking. I'm joking.
Yeah, because there were, various people that showed up in the fifth floor at different times during different days. I think Sarah Ransom was there one day. Um, the Maxwell's investigator was there at least one day. That that former cop, he's like a former New York cop. He actually was hired by Bankman Fried as well. Very interesting. He has access to like intelligence networks and stuff. Um, but yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I mean, even to like the people that were outside the courthouse and in and around Foley Square, I thought that was very interesting to observe. People just walking by or whatnot. But
Oh, there were
um,
some protesters out there as well, I remember.
yeah, on some days, some days there are more than others. Certainly, I think earlier in the trial there were more when it was still fresh in people's minds and it wasn't as cold because it got really cold a couple days.
Yeah.
The last week I remember it got really cold. The first day I remember, um, but yeah, overall a great experience, I would say.
Yeah, well, I'm absolutely thrilled the editor sent me to do this. And again, I enjoyed it so much I went back for Sarah Palin.
I
And
actually interviewed her last year, Dave. It was for exactly 60 seconds in person. Uh, but it was good. She's very polite. She didn't really make too much of a statement either way. But, really just encouraging people to vote. So I got
well,
her to say that. But
I was in, okay, it was early on, maybe it was third day or so. I'm in the cafeteria at lunch during her trial, or the New York Times trial. And I'm sitting at a very small table, just enough for two people. And she wanders by with her tray of food. And I said, Sarah, come join me. And she said, she kind of said, oh, right, something like that. And I said, how about an exclusive interview? And she said, oh, my attorneys would throttle me if I did. Who are you with? And I said, the Epoch Times. Her face lit up. She said something like, you guys are great. Oh, especially what you've done in the last year, something like that. Or you guys are terrific. I think she said, use the word terrific. I jotted it down right away after she said it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I said, can I quote you on throttle and great? And she said, yes. I said, okay. She wanders away and her lawyer passes me. And I said, so how's it going? And he says, it's just a case, man. Just another case. And I said, can I quote you on that? And he said, oh, no. If I wanted to be quoted, I'd say something more erudite. So I had to look up what erudite means now. so, okay, I left it alone. Well, every day after that, she would give me a big hello And one day she gives me a peace sign. And then I was sitting at lunch with Nadia and a few others from our group. Karu, remember Karu?
I didn't really have a chance to talk to her about. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So she was at the table. Sarah Palin came by and chatted with us. She said hello to me every day for the rest of the trial. And then one day, she's waiting by the elevator. And I think this was maybe February 9th. And I heard that it was her birthday. And she and I were born the same year. And I didn't want to say to her, so you're 50 whatever years old today. You don't say that to a lady, right? So I said something like, I hear today's your birthday. And she's like, she kind of put her head down and she said, yeah. And I said, my birthday was Tuesday, because my birthday is February 7th, which is coming up this week. Although I think I was wrong. I think my birthday was on a Wednesday that year or whatever. And she says, what day? And I said, the 7th. She said, oh, my brother's the 7th or something like that. And, and I said to her, when I said it's your birthday, and I said, we were born the same year, class of 1982. I didn't want to say 1964 and give her age away,
Yeah.
So, she's all excited and bubbly talking to me about our birthdays, and her boyfriend is stuffing her into the elevator. And as the doors are closing, she's still talking to me. He didn't want me talking to her.
Yeah.
And near the very end of the trial, when I was actually in the courtroom, I said to her, how about that exclusive interview? And she's like, I don't know. I said, here's my card. You call me if you want, when you're ready. And I gave it to the boyfriend, the hockey player, whoever he is. Never heard from either one of them. So never got the exclusive from Sarah Palin.
Shoot, that's too bad. Yeah, she's very well liked by the Tea Party, I know.
Well, she's very personable. And as you know, very short, a lot shorter than I thought. And
pretty small, yeah.
Yeah, and she's a grandmother. She looks good for a grandmother.
She does look good. Yeah. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, but what have you been covering recently, Dave, as far as stories?
I'm pleased to say I just started freelancing for People magazine.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, and I've one story posted so far. And they're having me do human interest. And that will include animals. I have an animal story lined up. The animals editor wants it for close to Easter, because it's kind of Easter related. So I have a little while to do that. And I have a second story that's kind of in limbo right now. I'm waiting for that to be posted. I think the editor wants a few tweaks on that one. And it's funny, when I was a kid, 12 years old, no such thing as the internet then, but I bought People magazine regularly on the newsstand. I mean, I remember on the cover of one, Henry Winkler as Fonzie was on the cover, and I was a big Happy Days fan. And there was another one with Paul McCartney on the cover. And I found out later on, a few years later, that the photographs inside that particular issue of Paul McCartney were taken by a very famous photojournalist named Harry Benson. And I had met Harry Benson over the years. A few years later, I met Harry Benson a few times. And what's pretty interesting about him is he was hired by the Beatles to come to America the first time they came to America and document what they were doing. So when he got off the plane, he arranged with the Beatles on the way over to JFK. When you get off the plane, turn around and give me a wave. I want to take your picture. So, the Beatles get off the plane on February 7th, 1964. And there's hundreds of kids who played hooky from school to meet the Beatles, and they're all screaming, and the Beatles are very excited to be in America, and they forget to turn around, but Harry Benson yells at them, turn around. They turn around very quickly, give him a wave, and he knocks off like 2 frames, two pictures. Well, Harry Benson, in his book on photojournalism, said, that was a very important day for me because I knew once I got to America, I wanted to stay here. And when he did, he came back and he was the head photographer for People magazine when it started in 1973. Now, that day he arrived with the Beatles, February 7th, 1964, that was the day I was born. I was born on the very day the Beatles arrived in America. It was a Friday, and Ed Sullivan was 2 nights later, a Sunday night. So, when I met Harry Benson for the first time when I was in my 20s, and I told him this, he almost fell off his chair. So, when I had my first interview with an editor from People magazine a couple of months ago, I wasn't sure if she was going to know who Harry Benson is, but I mentioned Harry Benson and those photographs of Paul McCartney in that issue. And she said, oh, the original, I think it was the original editor of People magazine died a few years ago. And at his memorial service, Harry Benson was there. And she said to him, we could never afford you these days. And I said to her, well, I'm the low budget Harry Benson, which got a laugh out of her. So when my first story was posted online, unfortunately, it wasn't in the print edition. It was online. The editor tells me he knows how much I want to be in the print edition, and he's going to get me there. Anyway, I called Harry Benson to let him know that I had an article with a photograph on people.com. I got his answering machine. I left a message. I didn't hear back from him. He must be at least 90 years old by now. So I didn't expect to hear back from him. But I'm telling you, if I could go back in time and tell my 12-year-old self, someday you're going to be published in People, my 12-year-old self would say, when did we get so bald and fat?
Wow, so he's up there, 90, huh? Or in the 90s.
I guess at least, I mean, if he came in 1964, he was in his 30s.
Yeah.
He's up there.
Yeah, that's at least 90s. Wow. Well, that's fantastic, man. People, that's pretty cool. They're based in New York City as well, no?
Yes, yeah. Now, Time Incorporated, which owned Time, Life, People, Sports Illustrated, Fortune, a couple of others, they sold off everything. I think they sold everything except Time and Life. So Sports Illustrated is somewhere else, and People magazine wound up at Meredith, which used to be Meredith, and then I guess it merged with or something. And then I think Time magazine had gotten sold off and then brought back to Time Incorporated. I can't keep up, but all I know is Time Life as it was for decades no longer exists. It's not in the same incarnation.
Sure. Yeah. Different era, for sure.
Well, as you can tell, I'm a little bit older, so I still love print.
Yeah.
And some of my work for the Epoch Times has wound up in print as well, because they have a weekly print edition of the newspaper and a weekly magazine, and they have a monthly magazine. So I've been in the monthly magazine, I've been in the weekly magazine, I've been in the print edition, and I'm still like a little kid seeing a picture of mine in the newspaper, like from when I was in 9th grade, photographing for my dentist. Nothing's changed. I still love to be published in print, and it's still
nice.
around. It hasn't disappeared completely.
Yeah. It's pretty impressive the Epoch Times is still able to do that in this era, because, for example, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, also called the AJC, based in Atlanta, Georgia, actually stopped printing their weekday newspaper. They only do I think one on Sundays now, so weekly, whereas before it was every day. So it's pretty interesting, how it's gone so digital.
Well, early on when I started at the Epoch Times, I was told there was going to be a New York daily edition, and it was supposed to come out the following January. So that would have been January of last year. It never came out.
Really? That's
Yeah, in
interesting.
fact, I asked the editor about it once, and he was saying they were having a hard time finding reporters. And he had hired me specifically to be on that team, on the New York print edition team. So he
Okay.
hired me,
Okay.
and then it just never happened.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, I
Yeah, it
never
still
asked
seems
why.
it still seems New York's like a media center, but I sense that Atlanta's, kind of taking over in a way, but it's still, the banking capital of the nation. But we're running out of time here, Dave.
Yeah, and the sun's
Got a
going
few
down. I see it getting
minutes
dark.
left, and I want to be respectful of your time. Yeah, as well. Are you still based in Malvern? And I'm just curious about that. If you want to talk about where you're based out of, and then
Well, born and
anything else
raised
you
in
want to
Malvern, but
mention, which we haven't already
I'm in
mentioned.
Suffolk County. I'm in Suffolk County. I'm born and
Okay.
raised in
Okay.
Malvern, but I'm not in Malvern at the moment. Can't wait to get back.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. And anything else you want to mention, which we haven't already covered about the trial or journalism stories you maybe are looking to cover this year that you want to talk about, or highlights from last year? Yeah. Anything you want to mention?
Well, we did talk about briefly before we started recording. You know, as I mentioned, there was that job posted for a writer, for strictly anime, and I
Yeah.
covered several anime conventions before, but I didn't apply for the thing because they said they want 5 stories a day from the writer. And
Every
we spoke about earlier this constant stream of product, and
Yeah. Yeah.
what could anyone possibly write about 5 times a day in animation? Anime is there that much going on in the anime world that you can write 5 articles a day? And if you do the math, that's 1,300 articles a year.
Yeah.
So I didn't
Yeah.
apply for it because it's just a ridiculous expectation. And as I said, I feel a lot of these outfits, especially the online outfits, have a ridiculous expectation for the number of stories per day.
Yeah. 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 I think I agree with you. I mean, it's like we talked about. It's like an information overload, information war, and it's um, there's definitely a lot of fluff, a lot of sizzle, little steak to a lot of it. You kind of have to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah, I'm a wheat
Yes.
kind of guy.
Speaking of that, what we have a couple minutes left. What are some sources you like? And if you want to talk about some favorite books too that either all time or recently, anything you
Okay.
like reading.
Well, my favorite book is the one I wrote.
Okay.
It's, it's my autobiography, and it's called Mickey Rooney Was Right. And it's essentially my life story about being in motion pictures, but never having long term success. All my success was short term and fleeting. Although there's a chapter in there about high school and my wonderful photography teacher, Joseph Zabo, and about Life magazine, looking at the pictures and that as a kid. And I write about writing for that newspaper with my dentist, for my dentist. And then I write about going to School of Visual Arts in Manhattan as the photojournalism major. But then it all goes into motion pictures. So it's all motion picture stuff for the rest. And I wound up being a high school teacher at the end. So there's a chapter on that. So there's some journalism stuff in there, but it's mostly about motion pictures and episodic television. There's a chapter on Law and Order, and some other shows I worked on. But I also did write another book. It's a young adult novel, and it's kind of like a Nancy Drew, but instead of being a teenage detective, she's a teenage reporter, and it's called Minnie Mornap Teen Reporter. And there's one book out so far. It's a series. So book 1 is out. Book 2 is halfway written. Book 3 is in my head. And it's so in this book, she's in 10th grade and she takes a journalism class, and she's got a great journalism teacher, and there's this explosion at school, and she becomes an investigative reporter and figures out the true reason for this. And it's very light and like Nancy Drew. So it's good for if you got any middle school readers in your life, that it's something good for them. And you can get both of them through authorhouse.com. Do not go through Amazon, authorhouse.com. And my pen name is D.W. Paone. Thanks for the plug.
Okay. And yeah, of course. Do you have a website otherwise, or social media you want to
yes, my
direct people to?
photojournalism website is www.davidpaone.com. However, right now it's down. I have somebody revamping it for me, and we're actually going to meet tomorrow. So I'm hoping the thing is going to be up and running in a week or so. I got to pay them and get this thing up and running again. So the domain still exists, but right now, if you go there, it's going to say suspended or something. I should have it up and running soon. And there's some pictures I shot from Law and Order on there. All of that is pretty much my black and white work from my younger days up until when I stopped shooting film about 3 years ago.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. And any social media?
Let's see. Yes, I have Instagram, D Paone Photojournalism.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's it. And that's a mix of recent photographs, published photographs, and some old school stuff too.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for coming on the show, and hopefully we can do it again. Thanks to the audience for tuning in, and stay frosty, folks. We'll see everybody next time.
All
The
right.
independent media and journalism you can trust is running on fumes. As a result of technocratic censorship, the tragedy is that hardworking independent journalists who have ethics and integrity are considering leaving the field of journalism. For as little as 3 cents a day, you can support my independent journalism media career at buymeacoffee.com/addyads. Thank you.